Welcome, everyone. My name is Justin Albrecht. I'm here to talk about mobile threats and about phones. At Lookout, I manage the threat intelligence team at Lookout, and we look a lot at phones. That's kind of what we focus on. And it's really interesting to compare it to traditional endpoints because we don't really think about phones anymore. They're kind of ubiquitous. They're like an extension of our personality. We deal with them on a daily basis. They access our personal and private data. They access a lot of our private data, actually. And we don't really think about protecting them. We think about protecting the screens. We think about protecting the actual chassis of the phone. We don't really think about protecting what's inside the phone. And I think up until about a year ago, we also didn't really see anything like a mobile breach. We never really saw a need for enterprises to think about mobile devices and how it relates to breaches. But 1 year ago, Group IB released some information on a threat group called Octopus. Now, this talk is going to be talking about the mobile threats from phishing to advanced threats, also some of our APT threats, but Octopus is a really interesting one because it's one of the first instances that we saw a breach caused by mobile devices. Octopus has a phishing kit. What they did was essentially they sent SMS phishing to various industries, various organizations, and they were able to compromise around 10,000 accounts, over 135 organizations, and that's about only 1/3 of what they were actually able to tally up. And what did they do? Basically what they did was they used it as a way into the organization. They used it as a way to pivot through infrastructure to cause downstream attacks, supply chain attacks. One of the first instances, besides maybe Lapsus, that we saw of organizations doing this at scale. Now, since that happened, we've actually seen a trend. There's some great research out there by CrowdStrike, by Mandated as well, and even Palo Alto that was looking at different groups that started to adopt the phishing kit of Octopus, started to do the same types of attacks. So SMS phishing, MFA bombing, SIM swap attacks, all with the same goal of compromising companies, usually to conduct downstream attacks later on. I think the latest is Muddled Libra, I believe it's called. That's right, by Palo Alto. But as you can see, it's actually a lot of groups that started to adopt this technique. And what we see is that this is some Mandiant research that was revealed at SleuthCon, a great talk called My Octopus Teacher, that basically the attribution of these groups is a bit muddled. It's hard to tell, who's who in this environment, but they're all using the same techniques. The thing that we can learn from it is that mobile is now an initial gateway into organizations, at least through phishing. Now, one thing that makes it an easy gateway in is that it's part of our identity process, right? Like we prove who we are with an organization by doing MFA on our phone, doing two-factor authentication. Now, that's because of what the part that the mobile device plays in security infrastructure, but it's also because of how the mobile device is. Like when you click on a link, any kind of phishing link, everyone's received the DHL delivery and probably thought, I would never click on this because it's like bug.online, whatever, I didn't order anything. The reality is that a lot of people actually do click on them. And it's because you can't really see the full URL in a lot of ways. There's a lot of automatic reaction when it comes to mobile devices. Some of the stuff that we saw when we did our own research on phishing investigations, looking at enterprise devices and private devices, was that people clicked a lot, or tapped a lot, if you want to call it, because it's a phone. Especially private devices. Your own personal device, I think you treat it with a little bit less caution, and about half of the people ended up clicking. And this is just a rising trend that we're seeing. So it's interesting to see now that we've gone from kind of mobile being initially focused at what we thought of, banking Trojans or maybe adware, to now being an initial vector, at least through phishing. So at the same time, phishing is probably the least sophisticated type of attack that we see, right? It's very effective, but it's nothing very interesting to talk about. Luckily, mobile spans the gap, or unluckily, however you want to see it, from phishing, which is like a one-click attack, to a full chain, to zero-click attacks. And another thing that we've seen in the last year is a number of discoveries regarding zero-click attacks and advanced spyware. So Pegasus, everyone's heard of Pegasus. We saw the first use of Pegasus. Access Now covered this in the war between Azerbaijan and Armenia, so it's the first use in an armed conflict. Predator was finally analyzed, like a look not just at the alien initial loader, but the actual Predator spyware kit built by Intellexa. Talos analyzed that. There was a discovery of RAIN, which is Quadream's tooling. And then you have the Kaspersky incident, so TriangleDB. This is probably one of the most interesting ones because all of this before is lawful intercept tooling. It's something that a private organization builds. They sell it for licenses to a government. The government uses it for national security purposes, to spy on dissidents or activists, or at least that's what we typically hear about. TriangleDB was kind of an interesting twist because with TriangleDB, it was spying on Kaspersky itself. They found it within their network, and they found that multiple organizations were targeted by this. Now, this market is changing. I think this is one of the other interesting things that happened in the last year is the US started to crack down with sanctions. The PEGA committee in Europe has also started to put a lot of pressure on the organizations that are selling this kind of tooling, the lawful intercept organizations. So we see, NSO Group is on the blacklist. Citrox and Intellex were recently added to the blacklist. What this causes is a shift in who they're selling it to, really. It doesn't mean they're going to disappear, right? Like, countries around the world have been buying this tooling to spy on people's phones. Just because you stop selling it, the demand doesn't go away. So one of the interesting things that we're seeing is those companies are now focusing on NATO countries, but there's other firms opening up, other exploit firms that are developing, full exploit chains for mobile. In Russia, for example, so the Russia zero-day firm, you can see here, Operation Zero, is offering even better prices than Zerodium is. There's some theory that they're funded by the Russian government, and that's how they're able to pay for this. But essentially, they're paying up to $2.5 million for full exploits against iOS, against Android. I saw $1.5 million for an exploit against Signal. So it begs the question, where is this going to go? If these companies that are traditionally the Israeli companies that were selling this kind of tooling are selling to NATO, what's going to happen with a Russian zero-day shop? What's going to happen with the companies that are going to be set up in the UAE? What's going to happen with vulnerability research in China? And why haven't we seen malware from there on mobile, especially in Russia? I think that's an interesting question because it also shows our intelligence gaps. Another thing that we're seeing also is that this is no longer just related to nation-state spying. There's an application called Pinduoduo. It's an e-commerce application. It's one of the most popular e-commerce applications in China. And we actually did some research to confirm that there were 0 days inside this application. We're talking an application with 800 million users. And they had 0 days. They hired a team of 100 researchers to specifically look for vulnerabilities in the Android OS in order to defraud their customers, in order to prevent the removal of their application from devices and beat out their competition. When they got caught, they just moved that team over to Temu. If you guys have ever heard of Temu, it's one of the most popular apps now in the US and the UK for e-commerce. So who knows what they're doing there? Probably nothing great. But we're seeing this shift where, these types of capabilities, traditionally we think of them as, because of the reporting, I think, if you think about a collection bias or a reporting bias, civil society goes to Citizen Lab, civil society goes to Amnesty International, and they say, hey, someone hacked my device, because they don't have the resources to really investigate it themselves. What are business leaders doing? What is the military doing? What is the government doing? They aren't going to those organizations. Are they even looking at their phones? It's I'm starting to think that, at least from a personal standpoint, there's a bit of collection bias when we look at who's actually being targeted by these. And we need to start thinking, especially in the case of like Triangle DB, what else is out there that nation states are capable of in using zero-click attacks and advanced spyware to target iOS devices and Android devices? Because I think there's a lot of intelligence gaps there. Now, it's not all sexy zero-click attacks, let's be honest. A lot of it is apps. A lot of the research that we've done at Lookout has been around APT usage of application-based malware to target devices. In the past year, we tied 2 malware families to APT41. We found the malware that the Iranian government was using to spy on protesters for the Mahsa Amini protests. We found malware linked to APT15 that was used to spy on Uyghurs and diaspora mostly. And we even found some lawful intercept surveillanceware that was developed out of Italy that was used to spy on people in Kazakhstan, in Syria, in Italy. All of this is application-based. And you kind of hear about it piecemeal in the news, but the truth is that when we look at our data set, there's actually a ton that's application-based tied to APTs that all of you are probably familiar with, their desktop targeting and the type of activity they have there. What we see is an overlap, even sometimes using the same C2. In fact, this is from the past year, looking not at commodity malware that we cover, but looking at like just custom malware that's built for mobile that's existed as an application. And we can see that for China, nearly half of what we saw as application-based malware was coming out of China. And this is just unique families. So here we're talking custom code that we can specifically tie to this group. Half of it was China, but we also saw a great amount of interesting stuff coming out of especially North Korea. And I think that's the group that I want to highlight the most. So North Korean APTs are working very hard at developing mobile malware that's application-based. And I'm talking pretty much any group you can name. So Kony, Kimsuki, Lazarus, Reaper, all of them have their own complete mobile tooling, and they're working very hard to get it on official Play stores. So what we see is they're compromising legitimate companies and then using those legitimate companies to try and get the applications up on the Play Store because those companies have developer accounts. They've also developed very unique ways of delivery. So for example, there was an interesting report that came out about Kimsuki, their delivery of some malware that we call Apple Zombie. And essentially, they could deliver it to a device without any user interaction. And they did it through syncing, essentially automatically syncing the device. All they needed was Gmail credentials. You can get that from spear phishing, but you could also get that just from it being leaked on the internet. So they create a developer account, they do an internal development test application, they add the accounts on the list of who it needs to be synced to, hack into the account to automatically sync the application to the device without the user knowing it. And the question here with, like, what's the difference between this application-based malware and something like Pegasus or Predator? It's delivery at the end of the day. I can tell you that the type of data that it's siphoning off the device is the same. It's pulling the photos, it's pulling the contacts, it's pulling all of the sensitive data off the device. There's no real difference in the level of access that it has to the device as far as personal data and sensitive data. The difference is in how stealthy it is, whether they need to trick the user, or they need to use social engineering. But even now, they're covering very interesting ways to get on devices without the user even knowing and without use of any kind of exploits. So a couple takeaways. I only had 20 minutes, so I would love to dive into some of this stuff further. So please feel free to talk to me afterwards about it. But I wanted to talk a little bit about targeting. A lot of times we see in the news that mobile surveillanceware or spyware is being used to target civil society. It's used to target journalists, dissidents. That's true. We see a ton of that. But it's not all of the story. For example, some of the North Korean APTs that we're looking at, we're targeting US fintech CEOs. We've seen them target military to gather intelligence. We've seen them target government issues. So the targeting is changing as we've observed it over the years. The other thing is, even though like zero-click exploits, they're great to talk about, they're very exciting, I can tell you that like by and large, it's mostly social engineering that's going on. It's mostly working the targets for a long time, trying to get them to land the malware. They're using various social media accounts, Telegram channels, creating their own funneling, creating their own landing pages, working very hard to trick the user to get the application on the device. And they're very effective at it as well. People aren't learning. It's probably a trend that you hear at a lot of talks. Another thing is that while there are options like third-party app stores for delivering this kind of malware or setting up your own staging, they are continuing to test the App Store defenses for official app stores, so things like Google Play, the Apple App Store. We see especially Indian and North Korean threat actors trying to get their malware up on those stores and continuing to poke at the defenses and see how they can get especially loaders on there. Google themselves, in their recent threat report, had some very interesting research on versioning, where they noted that some of the financial criminals were actually putting initial loaders on the Google Play Store, and then later updating the version with the malicious content and delivering that to the device. The APTs are doing the same. You know, we see that happen with very like innocuous loaders that they try to get on initially. Finally, give me 1 second. We're seeing this stuff delivered with desktop malware as well. I'm talking shared C2. I'm talking mobile malware being hosted on infrastructure that's also hosting desktop malware. We see it operating in tandem. I think a lot of people try to treat devices like they're part of a vacuum instead of looking at the victim. And really, they're going to target anything they can that has sensitive data that can get access to the victim. I talked to a black hat hacker who works for a certain government agency, and he told me, why would I hammer away at infrastructure that's defended by millions of dollars of tech when I can just target a device that's going to get me the same level of access eventually, just by tricking the user? It's a good point, right? These devices store cloud credentials at this point. You know, there are ways to get through by targeting a device that's really easier to get to just because you have to trick the human behind it rather than going against, you know, hardened network infrastructure. And finally, gaps. There's stuff that we're not hearing about. The Ukraine war, for example. When it started, I thought that we'd be hearing about Russian malware being used against Ukrainians. Has anyone seen a report on it? There was one. It was Turla DDoS malware reported by TAG. And it was very unsophisticated. All they did was they basically flipped the DDoS over to Ukrainian targets. So we have to ask ourselves, what else is out there? Like, we're looking ourselves. We're constantly looking. We cover like a number of Russian malware that's application-based. But we're still asking ourselves the same question, you know, what are their capabilities? What are they using to get on devices? Is it SS7? Is it telco attacks? You know, is it, are they close to them? But we're not sure. And I think that's one thing that we need to ask ourselves. There's still a lot of questions out there about what kind of mobile tooling the APTs are using, but also nation states. And with that, I'm done. Thank you. Please see me after if you have any questions.